Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside my co-host Adam Caplan, and joining us to break down this Week 9 Eagles game against the Jacksonville Jaguars at the link is Greg Cosell. Fellas, the Eagles are 5-2 after a 37-17 win last Sunday against the Bengals. The Jaguars, well, they're not as good. They're 2-6 after falling to the Packers in Green Bay last Sunday. Although one could argue that their 30-27 loss to the Packers was one of their better showings of the year. It was actually a tie game with about 150 to play. So, Greg, let's talk real quickly on a big picture standpoint here. The Jags are 2-2 in their last four. They have scored 27 or more points in 3 of their last 4 games. So, would you say you've seen some kind of improvement from them offensively all around since that really awful start that they got off to?
I would say a little bit, and I think one reason for that, and it's funny, we've had no reason to talk about this because we don't spend time talking about the Jaguars, but I do with others and with my matchup group as we all sit and watch tape all through the week. I think one reason has been the increase in snaps and volume with Tank Bigsby. I think he's a better runner than ETN, and I think he gives them a lot more in terms of sustainability in their offense. And while you wouldn't call him purely explosive, he's broken off some decent sized runs as well. So I think he's been a pretty big factor in their ability to sort of play better offense throughout the course of the game. Because Lawrence has been clearly up and down this year. We can get more into that. We know they just made a trade too, changing their left tackle. I assume Walker Little will be the new left tackle.
He is.
And you know, he did not play particularly well this past week, but when he's played in the past, he's played pretty well at left tackle. Some might not know that he came out of Texas and ended up at Stanford. He was a big time recruit. He was one of the most highly recruited tackles in recent memory and ended up playing very little at Stanford. He played his freshman year when he was very good and then got hurt and really did not play a lot of college football. But he was viewed as a major prospect. And my guess is he'll turn out okay. He just struggled a bit last week.
All right. A lot to talk about there. Adam, real quick, big picture standpoint. Doug Peterson, he's been back to the link before, but obviously he comes back now really under the gun here. They have not won games. He has, going back to last year, lost a lot more than he's won. How much under the microscope is he for ownership here as they lose games week after week?
He is, because Shad Khan, the owner, in the spring said that the coaches had to put a bigger emphasis on player development. When your owner comes out and says that, the microscope is going to be on you, no question about it. And they spent a lot of money in free agency. They felt good about their last couple of drafts, and their record's poor. And they've made stadium upgrades. They're going to be around there a while. In Jacksonville, they've said that for decades they plan on being there. So they got to be better than this. Doug came in 2 years ago on that white horse. They got everything turned over from the Urban Meyer experience, which was terrible, and brought his positivity in there, changed everything around. They couldn't believe it, how great they were. Then they choked down the stretch, unfortunately, like the Eagles did last season. And voila, here we are. It's been bad ever since. You just talked about how they're a little bit better lately. That's great. And we'll get into their injury report. Their injury report's bad. They just can't get themselves rated. It's tough to see. And you look at that division, which, the Texans are struggling a little bit now. The Texans have the injury issues. This would have been, if they could win this game, though, to move this along here, if they could win this game, you never know what will happen with the season. But it's going to be difficult. Obviously, it's a non-conference game, but they got so much going on, Geoff. It's hard to imagine they could get it done.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. We'll see, though. The injuries do play a big role for the Jaguars in their season and also in this game for the Eagles. As we get to the injuries, the Eagles will once again be without their tight end, Dallas Goedert. This will be the 3rd straight game that he's going to be sidelined with a hamstring, wasn't able to get out on the practice field. So not a great sign for Dallas Goedert. And then also cornerback Darius Slay, who we saw suffer a groin injury last week against the Bengals. He also is not going to play, was not able to practice. So it looks like Isaiah Rodgers will get the start. And it has been quite a while since Isaiah Rodgers has started a game. In fact, December 26, 2002, when he's with the Colts. And they will also continue to be without starting left tackle Jordan Mailata, who will miss the third of 4 games that you have to miss when you're on IR. He has a hamstring injury. So that means Fred Johnson, who we discussed on Inside the Tape this past week and playing well, will start again for Mailata. Goddard, of course, will be replaced by Grant Calcaterra and Jack Stoll. Calcaterra coming off a 3-catch, 58-yard game against the Bengals. I guess the good news is, though, that Mekhi Becton was cleared from his concussion, and he will be back at right guard. Although we've all talked about it, Tyler Steen played fairly well there, but it's always good to have your starter back. Greg, I mean, I'm sure you're a little bit interested in how Isaiah Rodgers is going to hold up as a starter in his first start in over 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, he made that great play on the what turned out to be the Gardner-Johnson interception. He basically ran stride for stride with Chase. And the ball was probably a hair underthrown, but he was right there. That was a really, really good play. And he located the ball and was able to get his hand up. So that was a terrific play. And he was a pretty good player the year he started in Indy, which was 2022, as you said, Jeff. So I'm anxious to see him because obviously Darius Slay's getting up there in years. I don't know how many more years he has as a true starter in this league. But yeah, but I think we're all curious. Now, obviously, there's also some injuries that didn't just happen for the Jaguars, but Christian Kirk is out. Adam, you would know more about Brian Thomas, the rookie wide receiver, who's played very well this year.
Yeah, so Jeff, that's the thing. You mentioned Isaiah Rodgers. He's been a great story considering he had a year off. But you look at these receivers, they're big. I mean, Gabe Davis is a big guy at 6'2", very strong. He'll go get the football downfield. You've got Brian Thomas, who I could tell you the Jaguars think he's well ahead of schedule. They weren't sure because he had the one big year at LSU with production. He's ahead of schedule, I would say. And Chad Hall is the receivers coach. He's really good.
Yeah.
Now, with Brian Thomas, he's got a chest contusion. The issue is not whether he could play or not. It's whether he could take contact. They don't want to give him the full thumbs up. This could be a Sunday decision where they work him out before the game, see how he feels. And then I mentioned Gabe Davis. He's had recurring shoulder problems for several weeks. It limited him very much last game. That's a problem. Greg mentioned Christian Kirk, Parker Washington for the second straight year will replace him as the slot receiver. So yeah, they've got injury problems. Now again, if they don't play, their depth is going to be severely tested.
Yes, it will be. And what I think is fascinating about this matchup, and we'll get into it a little more, is that Darius Slay has been the left corner and Quinyon Mitchell has been the right corner. And I'm wondering, with the height that the Jaguars could have at corner, because Brian Thomas is a pretty big guy, and Gabe Davis, if he plays, is also a bigger guy, if I'm not mistaken. I wonder if that poses issues on the side of the field that Isaiah Rodgers will be lining up, which I assume will be in Darius Slay's spot at left corner. I don't know if coaches want to switch that and flip it and all of a sudden play Quinyon Mitchell on the other side just to try to invite certain matchups, Greg, but I assume it's just going to go according to what we've seen, and Isaiah Rodgers fills in for Darius Slay at his spot.
I would be surprised if there's a change, Jeff. I think
Agreed.
Mitchell has progressed really nicely at the right corner position. I don't think they want to change that right now. I would think he would stay at right corner and Rodgers would play left corner. Let's put it this way. You never know, but I'd be very surprised.
Gotcha. All right. So we will talk more about the matchups in the passing game as we get on. Those are the injuries. The good news for the Eagles, I know that Devontae Smith missed a practice for personal reasons. He's fine, expected to play. And Adam, we can maybe talk for a second about Jalen Carter, who was again on the injury report throughout the week with a shoulder injury, expected to play. But this is something that I believe we talked about when they drafted him, that went back to his days at Georgia, as far as having a shoulder issue that could limit him
Correct.
at times.
Yeah, we never could figure out, like we dug into this, and he definitely had some issue at Georgia. We don't know what type of shoulder issue it was, but teams were concerned about it. And last year, he also was listed with it as well. So it's something to watch going forward. You're absolutely right. That's something like if it's in a report from clubs, you get concerned about it going forward after the player's drafted, and it's happened a couple times now.
Yeah.
By the way, where do we stand on Jalen Carter as a player? I'm not talking about the injury. I mean, obviously he's injured. That's one thing. Would you guys say he's been a dominant player on a week-to-week basis?
I feel like he's had dominant moments within games, but not dominated it the way we've seen Fletcher Cox take over a game
Right.
consistently, the way you see Aaron Donald, the way you see Dexter Lawrence. That's how I view it, Greg.
I would agree.
Yourself?
I think there are snaps in which he looks like he could be just the best tackle in the league.
Mhm.
But then there's other times where, and I only use this word because I can't think of another one right now where he disappears. I hate that word, but just for want of a better word right now, because the talent level is so high that my guess is the Eagles feel like he should be a more dominant player, snap after snap after snap, and he's still very young. So, we're not making a definitive judgment on his career right now. But I
Mhm.
think, Adam, when you say that's fair, that they're probably waiting for a little bit more on a snap to snap basis.
Yeah, and the hope here is with Clint Hurt, who's the D-line coach, is really good, that he plays more consistent football. It's funny you mentioned Greg, 'cause Jeff and I have actually talked about what you just brought up. Not only could he be the best defensive tackle in football, if he applied himself every week, it came out with fire every week. I get it; it's not easy to do that, but honestly, he could be one of the best defensive players in the National Football League if he put his mind to it.
Right.
Yeah.
He's
I
that
I thought
gifted.
after the Saints game, we might see. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's the
not
one.
every game could be like the Saints game. That was that was an amazing game, but I
Yeah,
Incredible.
think we
I
might
mean, he
see it a
dominated the
week or
game.
two later.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I don't think we're talking about having a Saints game every week. That's probably
right,
Sure.
unrealistic. Yes.
right. But
Greg,
maybe
hey,
once a
real
month or
quick.
every 3 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, the
Well, on that,
Jaguars. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to ask this question to Greg. When it looks good or great for Jalen Carter, what does that look like to you on tape?
Oh, his combination of quickness off the ball and short area power, strength that he transitions to power immediately, and his strong hands and arms. I mean, all of it goes together. He gets off the ball with explosion, and he's so quick off the ball that then he's able to literally control right away. And then his strength and short area power is just incredible. He's got a club move when he's at his best. I mean, he looks like he could move a tree. So he's just really strong. So, I mean,
Wow.
at his best, he's a really, really dominant player.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the Jaguars. We got into their wide receiver injuries, but they've got more. They have some real issues on the offensive line. Their left guard, Ezra Cleveland. Now, Doug Peterson said he's probably not playing, leaving the door open. I'd be shocked at this point if Ezra Cleveland, their left guard, plays. And Brandon Scherf, their right guard, who we all remember from his days with Washington, is a game time decision, as is Travis Etienne, and as we mentioned, Gabe Davis also, and Brian Thomas. So some of these are major injuries, obviously, if you're down to backups
Yeah.
at guard. Obviously, as you mentioned,
Actually,
Greg, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, actually, Cleveland's out. He was actually he was out on Friday. They actually listed him out, just so you're aware.
Got it.
Yeah, and it wound up being worse than they when he went through the testing, wound up being a high ankle sprain. He's definitely out, and they're going to go with
Hodgins.
they're going to go with the kid of Cooper Hodgins, the kid from App State who filled in last week.
Yeah, he's played snaps. Yes.
Yeah, Hodges, he's a 7th rounder last year. He filled in for Cleveland when Cleveland left the game, and this is the story of this team, man. It's a bunch of their secondary guys. They missed they were a bunch of their secondaries missing time. They're all back. But Jeff, on your point, it's their offense now. It's beat up.
Yeah, definitely. Greg, any kind of scouting report on Cooper Hodgins for us?
Did not see him coming out of college. Really don't know anything about him. But obviously he's the backup, so we'll see. I mean, so now they're going to play, in a sense, two backups: Walker Little at left tackle and Hodges at left guard. So,
Right.
that's never a good feeling for the quarterback.
And potentially 3 if Brandon Scherf can't make it.
Right.
So that'll be
Right.
again kind of up to the kickoff there, and we'll see what goes on. And then, obviously Etienne, his issue is sort of mitigated by the fact that Tank Bigsby has played really well in that place and added something to their running game. How about second-year receiver Parker Washington, who will take Christian Kirk's spot in the slot? Greg, what kind of tape do you recall from him, especially last year?
He to me is pretty much a slot type receiver. I think he's got good quickness, but not a lot of speed. So, you know, he kind of fits that role. So he'll play. I shouldn't say he'll play predominantly inside because we don't know what their wide receiver position will exactly look like. And obviously teams now move players around, but he's not a true outside receiver in a strict sense.
Right. All right. Ronald Darby, former Eagle, who is a Jaguar corner now, expected to play. He was dealing with
Yep.
a hip, but he's fine. So that's good. All right, let's start with the Eagles offense against the Jags defense. Eagles have now have the 8th ranked scoring offense in the NFL, helped by 65 points in their past 2 games. 21st on third down, 19th in the red zone. However, while you might say that's not great situational football, they are top 5 in 4th down and goal to go. So interestingly, it depends on where in the red zone that they have the ball, their impact there. And of course, if you're not great on third down, but you can pick up 4th down like the Eagles usually do well with the tush push, then it mitigates that a little bit. Greg, the Jaguars have a new defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen. He came over from Atlanta.
Yep.
Adam and I have been talking about this. If I recall correctly, one of his strengths was he had a really good run defense in Atlanta. And it doesn't look like the Jaguars this year have had a very good run defense. I know that the metrics say on the outside runs, they've been really bad. Is that a function of the linebacker injuries and the D-line injuries they had early in the year, or do they, when you watch them on tape, do they just not look like a disciplined defense?
Well, it's funny you say that because it's not so much a lack of discipline. I feel like their D tackles get moved a lot in with double teams.
Mm.
And if they get pushed off the ball, that makes it really, really hard for the linebackers to play. So to me, that's been a recurring theme is that there's been too many double teams where their D tackles get pushed back 2, 3, 4 yards off the ball, and that really makes it difficult. But they've also not been great against the pass. I mean, Ryan Nielsen is a man-to-man coach. He wants to play man coverage, okay? They play cover 1 and 2-man coverage at a really high percentage. They play the highest percentage of 2-man coverage in the league. And so people know what that means. It means they're playing man-to-man across the board on 5 eligible receivers with 2 deep safeties. That's what 2-man coverage is. So they played a very high percentage of that. So, you know, even though they play a lot of cover 1 as well, I'd say overall they're more of a too high structure defense. But the issue with that is they've not been able to generate any kind of consistent pass rush from their 4-man D line. Josh, I guess he's Hines Allen now. Josh Hines Allen has not had the same year he had a year ago rushing the quarterback. Trayvon Walker on the other side has really not developed as a true pass rusher, as many thought he might when he was the #1 pick in the draft. They've tried to blitz, but they've allowed the most passing touchdowns in the NFL when they blitz. So this is a defense that's really struggling right now, both defending the run and playing the pass. And, you know, we'll get to our picks and all that, but I would really expect the Eagles, both running the ball and Jalen Hurts, to have a big game in this game. You know, but all I'm going is by what we've seen up to this point. You know, you can always qualify it by saying, hey, you never know what's going to happen. But if you go by what's happened up to this point, I mean, I would expect Jalen Hurts in the pass game to really have a big game. And I would expect that the Eagles would be able to run the football.
You know, Adam, when the Jaguars and Doug Peterson fired Mike Caldwell as their D coordinator at the end of last year and hired Ryan Nielsen, there was a lot of excitement about what they thought that they could do as a defense. And, you know, as Greg mentioned, the defensive tackles haven't played well, which plays right into the hands of the Eagles, who are big and stout up in the middle, right?
Yep.
And then, of course, the linebackers of the Jaguars were supposed to be a strong point. They used a top 15 pick on Devin Lloyd, and they signed the guy who's from Harvard, whose name I always butcher.
Alukin. Yeah.
Alukin, yeah. Foley Alukin, is that what they?
Foye Alukin.
Foley Alukin,
Boy.
yeah. But it just hasn't. I don't know.
Well,
It just
it's funny because
obviously hasn't worked out for them.
Lloyd essentially is now a rotation player with Vontrell Miller, who's a second-year player from Florida, who's actually shown up really well, more so than Lloyd.
Wow.
You know, Miller has really, you could argue he's played as well as anybody on their defense.
Do you guys remember very early in the draft process when Lloyd and Nakobe Dean were considered top 20 picks?
Yeah.
You know, when the early draft Knicks were putting out there. I mean, those two guys were supposed to be the crown jewels of inside linebackers in the draft that year.
And Lloyd, again, not being there every day, but Lloyd is kind of a real, you know, he's kind of an enigma wrapped in a riddle because he's 6'2", 235. He can run, but my sense is he has issues with key and diagnose, with how he sees things. And in the NFL, no matter how athletic you are, if you're a beat late, it's hard to be a really good linebacker.
Mm.
And the other thing is, they traded Roy Robertson Harris, who was a longtime starter D tackle for them, and he got kind of benched anyway. And Eric Armstead, Greg, has he been a factor at all?
Not a big factor, no.
That's hard to believe. Wow.
Honestly, because I know the fans are getting on Cisco, and Tyson Campbell came back from his knee injury, and Darnell Savage, they're playing at nickel and a safety.
Well, they're
Nothing
not
seems to
anymore,
work.
but he had a couple of games where he played at nickel. He's not anymore.
Right, he's back at safety.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, they've tried a lot of different things. Nothing's working.
Right.
And this is what you asked earlier. Why are they 2-6? We just gave the answer. So the defense has not performed. Everything around Nielsen, who did a great job, by the way, in Atlanta. They were very impressive.
Great job.
Yeah, in fact, with Atlanta, the thing was that when you looked at it, it was kind of like you look at their talent, you go, how are they doing this? And then here, I would argue that their talent's way better and they're underachieving severely.
And, this is where, and, look, I'm sure Jacksonville fans down there are, they probably are, not happy with Ryan Nielsen because the defense has not played well. But this is where, people have to understand this is tough because now you're a coach and you feel like you've evaluated your talent and you're based on not only your evaluation, but what guys have done in the past. And you feel like, hey, we can play this way based on what guys have done. Okay. And then they don't do that. So it becomes very hard to decide, well, do we keep doing what we're doing because I'm expecting guys to do what they've done and, maybe it'll click in, or do I have to change and for instance, start playing a much higher percentage of zone, just to throw out an example. That's a hard deal for a coach. I know fans might think, oh, that's easy. That's an easy situation, but it's not. It's really hard. I mean, this year, look, last year you could argue that Josh Hines-Allen was arguably one of the 2 or 3 best edge rushers in the league, okay? He's not this year. So what do you do?
It's mind-boggling. He's one of the
that was a rhetorical question, obviously.
I know.
Well, here's the crazy thing, though, guys. We just went over their entire defensive roster pretty much. They're all dropped off. It's not just one guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand it. It's Ryan Nielsen
in a crazy situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, Jeff. They fired Mike Caldwell. He was the fall guy. They fired just about the entire defensive staff. Kept the offensive staff because Doug had to do something to keep his job. And you're bringing in Ryan Nielsen, who did such a phenomenal job. He comes here with way more talent, and they severely underachieve. It's not a talent issue; it's a performance issue, and they can't reach these guys. Yeah, that's why they're bad.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this Jaguars team, was going to be pretty competitive in the AFC South because of its defense. I thought when they got Armstead and joined him with Josh Allen Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker in year 2, he had the quietest 10 sacks ever as a rookie, but he had them. And then Cisco, I thought the linebackers would be good. I really thought this was going to be at least a formidable defense, not a bad one.
And they signed Savage, who I can tell you for a fact, a DB coach in the league who I respect tremendously, thinks that Savage is a 5-tool safety, one of the only 5 or 6 true 5-tool safeties in the league. Okay. And, up at the same level of guys like Javon Holland, Minkah Fitzpatrick, those kinds of players. And he hasn't quite performed at that level. So, anyway, we could go over this forever, but that's the bottom line.
It seems like the Jags have a team full of those guys who just haven't performed to that level. So,
and if they continue to play man, Jalen's going to see man on Brown and he's going to see man on Smith, and he's going to feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, it feels like there's going to be a very good matchup for the Eagles in however they decide that they want to attack this Jags defense, whether they want to run, throw it short, throw it long. And I think that what, Adam, we would like to see from the Eagles to start to really know the corner has been turned good is a mix of the explosive alongside the methodical drives that you saw last week against the Bengals. You take what the defense gives, you attack where you can. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and complain if they score 35 points because they get 5 touchdowns of 60 yards or more. But I think what they also want to do is show that balance and really be able to help their defense out, control time of possession, and then strike when they see the opportunity.
It's interesting because with Barkley, they could pretty much do whatever they want. When the Eagles are on, and you saw it last week, they could do whatever they want. Like they could come out passing because Greg just outlined the matchups are pretty good for the Eagles. And Jalen sees one-on-one coverage, as we saw last week. He's going to take advantage of it.
He's going to throw it.
Yeah. As Greg outlined, by the way, with Joe Burrow on our pregame show, if he sees one-on-one coverage, that ball's coming out. So They don't need to
And
play any particular way, to be honest
this
with
is,
you. They can do
see,
whatever
this
they
is
want.
also where I'm always fascinated by process, and I wish I could be a fly on the wall with Kellen Moore this week and the meetings,
Yeah.
because they're going to feel like they can be successful both running and passing. Okay, I can tell you that right now. That's what they're going to feel. They're not going to announce that publicly, but that's what they're going to feel. Okay, so now you're Kellen Moore. And everybody talks about how the Eagles have gotten off to slow starts, and obviously they prefer not to get off to slow starts. Last week was a little fluky because the Bengals had the ball for 9 or 10 minutes to start the game. But so now, if you're Kellen Moore and you feel like you can, I don't want to say do whatever you want. No coach necessarily thinks you can just do things at will, but
Yeah.
they'll feel like the matchups are favorable, running and passing. So how do you put your script together to start the game? That's not an easy thing because just because they can make plays doing both. Now you've got to actually put a script together and decide what's my balance. Balance is an easy word to say. It's very platitudinous. Oh, what's that balance? But how do you do that? Certainly, I'm not a coordinator. I can't answer that question. But I don't think that's so easy.
Agreed. Agreed. All right. We will talk now. Let's turn it and talk about this Eagles defense against Jacksonville's offense. I did mention the Jaguars are scoring more points lately. The Eagles are allowing fewer points lately. In fact, they've only allowed 2 offensive touchdowns in the past 3 games, and they now have the league's 7th best scoring defense
Yeah.
at 18.9 points per game. Meanwhile, the Jags are the league's 21st scoring offense, around 21.5. Greg, how would you compare the tape of Trevor Lawrence for the first 3 or 4 weeks compared to what you've seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks?
Oh, I mean, I don't think he's a whole lot different. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can hit some plays here and there, but the quarterback's not dramatically different. He's now in his fourth year or fifth year?
I think this is, well, he just signed the long-term deal, which you usually do after 3. I think this is year 4 for him. Yeah,
Yeah, I
Urban
mean,
Meyer was the year 1, right?
Yeah,
right.
21 he was drafted. Yes.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, look, you're dealing with a quarterback that, and I've talked to coaches about this. I mean, because obviously what I do is I watch the tape and then I talk to coaches. I don't like to talk to people before I see things myself because then, you become prejudiced and biased as you're watching. And I don't like to feel that way because that's human nature. If you have something in your head and you're watching, you go, oh, this guy told me this. Um, but I would say Lawrence, and I know he was viewed as generational, and that's not his fault at all. It's a shame that he was viewed that way. But I thought coming out, he had a few issues that needed to be cleaned up if he was going to be a great player. And some of those issues have not been cleaned up. He's a big kid. He's very elongated. He's a strider. When there are bodies around him, he tends to rush himself. While he has a good arm, he does not have a big arm, as big as people think. Okay. And some of his deeper balls, unless he can really stride into it, tend to lose energy on the back end. And he still has these, what I would call surprising lapses of reading judgment. I mean, he threw an interception last week that, to be quite honest, was a rookie interception. I mean, there was only one player on the route concept that he had to be aware of when he made the throw. Okay, when he chose to throw it to who he threw it to, and it was actually to Kirk on a seam bender. And he didn't account for the only player he had to be aware of, who was Xavier McKinney, who intercepted the ball because he ended up throwing it right to him. So he has these lapses mentally where, again, I'd have to be there and say, hey, Trev, what'd you see? I think that's what coaches probably do in these situations. They may not do it right after the play because they have to move on to the next thing. They may do it in the meetings. But he seems to, every once in a while that happens with him on throws that are just, like I feel like he should be beyond that.
Yeah. We saw that firsthand, Adam, in that game 2 years ago in the rain. I think it was at the Link, right?
Yes.
And
Oh, yeah.
there were a couple of moments. The play I mentioned on one of our recent pods where Agnew was wide open in the end zone and he had rolled all the way to the right and he just has to throw it, but he holds on to it for like 10 seconds. Then he got sacked and fumbled. It was a very Carson Wentz-esque type of play, meaning 2020 Carson Wentz. That was sort of mind-boggling for a guy, as Greg was mentioning, who was #1 overall pick, and it wasn't his first year. And yeah, I think we've seen those lapses at times. And obviously, if you're the Eagles, you're trying to dictate that and hope that there are more of them.
And then, by the way, he can make big time throws. I don't want to suggest the guy stinks,
Of course.
but
No, he's had his moments.
yeah, there's just been, and it's a word that, again, I hate the word, but it's true for this conversation. There's just been a lack of consistency to his game. You see the great moments and you think, man, this guy can be a really good quarterback. And he's had those moments and he's had those games. I mean, he's had some big games in this league without question,
Mm-hmm.
but he just hasn't reached that level where you feel like week to week, this guy is a top 6 or 7 quarterback, which when you draft him #1 overall, that's what you're clearly expecting.
See, last year he had a high ankle sprain and he had a bad shoulder, and I can't speak for him. I just know they thought that he would compensate for it, and he just wasn't right. There was obviously he was beat up physically. He played poorly. He did not have a good season. That's a fact. And then you come to this season, you see the inconsistency, and they felt that they brought in Gabe Davis, they drafted Brian Thomas, and then obviously they had Kirk. Now Kirk's out, but and Evan Ingram, we got to mention him, who's a superior athlete, and we saw last week what Mike Gesicki did. So they Brenton Strange, they probably overdrafted. It was the second rounder last year, but they felt like they had a great pass target group, and their offense for some reason, as we move along here, for whatever. And I know people beat up Press Taylor, and that's fine. It's hard to put your finger on one particular thing, Jeff. As we bring it back to you, it's just the whole team is underachieved.
Yeah. Yeah. Brenton Strange, by the way, he had some really great moments at Penn State, and then he tested through the roof, if I recall, at the combine, and that's why he probably went from like a guy who might have been a 3rd or a 4th to a 2. I feel like if he gets an opportunity, I mean, he's got Evan Ingram, who's
he looks like a guy that
job.
can develop into a good player if he's if the opportunity presents itself.
Right. But
although Jeff, he's no Tyler Warren.
No, oh man, we're gonna have great conversations, Greg, about
I love
Tyler
that kid.
Warren
I did him this summer from last year, and I thought he was really a good prospect, and that doesn't count this year yet. I haven't watched him, but I just want to make one quick point about Lawrence. We talked about the fact that he's been inconsistent, but then in the same game in which he threw the interception this past week, he made 2 big time throws with less than a minute to play in the first half. He had Washington for 23 yards in the outside void in cover 2. He had Thomas for 28 yards in a tight window versus single high safety zone. I mean, he's capable of this. I don't want to sit here and say he's going to come into the link and go 30 for 40 for 380, but he is capable of making big time throws.
Right. You wonder what Vic's choice of defense will be this week. We've seen a lot of different modifications week to week. A couple of weeks ago, it was the Cooper DeJean blitz game. Then the week after that, it was the Nakobe Dean blitz game. And then this past week, it was, hey, let's not play as much cover too high. Let's play some cover 1 man, right? And because we can, right? So here you're playing a Jaguars team. Now you're down a back to your backup corner. And what we don't know is what level of trust Vic has in Isaiah Rodgers. But at the same time, if they're going to have 2 and maybe 3 backup offensive linemen in, you could see Vic maybe wanting to do a few things up front just to try to get at Lawrence pretty quickly.
Again, we're not Vic, and I'm not getting into his head. I have no idea. But I wouldn't be surprised if he played man, decent amount of man. They're not going to be worried about Gabe Davis. I mean, Gabe Davis is just a guy.
Yeah.
Brian Thomas, assuming health, he's when I watched his LSU tape, one of the things I put down in my notes was he's an ascending talent, that he's going to just get better and better. That kid's big and he can run. That kid's going to be a really good player. He's the guy you'd have to be concerned about. Ingram, obviously, as well, because he's truly an athletic tight end. But other than that, they're not really going. It doesn't mean that Parker Washington's not going to, can't play. These guys are NFL players, but they're not going to be game planning for Gabe Davis or Parker Washington.
Yeah. He isn't. Yeah. Gabe's making $10 million a year, and he's a certain type of player.
Yeah.
But Brian Thomas is explosive. I'm a little surprised he's doing as well as he has. It's a good story.
Yeah.
And he's hurt though, so we'll see.
Greg, why did, when you compare the first round receivers, we saw obviously Neighbors, we saw Marvin Harrison Jr., and we saw Rome Odunze go bang, bang, bang right off the board really early. And then, if I'm not mistaken, there was a pretty big lull before then Brian Thomas got taken. Did A.D. Mitchell get taken ahead of him? I don't even remember at this point.
A.D. Mitchell.
No. He went, right.
Yep.
Right. So what did you see on tape from Brian Thomas at LSU that you think might have pushed him down past those other 3?
Hard to know the answer to that. I mean, he only had 1 good year. I really, really like. I mean, I could have made the argument, and again, if I say this and people hear it, I don't want them to think, I'm saying one guy's a 10 and one guy's a 5. but I could have made the argument if you forced me to, that I liked him more than Odunze, because I
Hmm.
think there's more to Brian Thomas in terms of what he can become.
Wow.
Um, Brian Thomas ran a 4.33 and he plays really fast, really fast. I
Mm.
mean, he's long, he's smooth, he's got accelerating speed, but he also caught the ball in the middle of the field. He's a more flexible athlete than Odunze. I really liked his tape. Initially I thought there were some similarities to T. Higgins, but I came away thinking that he's more explosive than T. Higgins, which he is.
Hmm.
So I said the bottom, here was what I typed my final transition line. The bottom line with Thomas as he enters the NFL is that he has home run ability with his size and stride length, and that trait is always in demand in the NFL. And I believe there can be much more to his game with coaching and natural development.
All right.
See,
So
on what
obviously,
Greg said,
yeah.
I was just going to add this. On what Greg said was that he's the kind of guy, because if you looked at his college numbers, okay, 21 and 22, very low. Like, you're like, this guy's not getting drafted in the first 3 rounds. Then 23, he blows it up. 68 for 1177, 17 touchdowns.
Yep.
That gets you on the map big time, the scouting word, obviously SEC. Then Greg just talked about the combine workout. You put the tape together of 1 year, you're
Hmm.
not getting past the top 40. And
Yeah.
then but then you go, wow, we want to develop this guy. We'll draft him in the first round, bring him along
Yeah.
slowly. Then he has this good training camp. You're like, wow, he's further ahead than we thought.
And I know for a fact he was one of TJ Houshmandzadeh's guys, so he probably was taught a lot more in the offseason about route running in the league, which probably helped him tremendously.
Sure.
There you go.
One guy I want to just quickly throw the spotlight on as we close off the Eagles defense versus the Jags offense would be Evan Ingram, who has
Yeah.
been pretty sort of very quietly very productive for the Jags. The Eagles know him from his time with the Giants. I'm trying to go through the Eagles schedule. Have they played a team with a tight end as talented as Ingram? I mean, Kyle Pitts, I feel, was still sort of getting his feet wet in that new
Yeah.
offense when they
Yep.
played Atlanta. Tucker Kraft, same thing, was battling it out with Musgrave there earlier on in the season before seizing hold of it against Green Bay. Cade Otton was not really the focal point of the Bucs offense then, like he has to be now. So this might be the first team that the Eagles have faced where the tight end is a legit threat and somebody that you got to draw the red circle around.
Gesicki got him last week though for 73.
Yeah, he's a good, but even he's
a
a little situational and splitting time. I
Right.
mean, Gesicki, Ingram gets most of the snaps, I would think.
Oh,
Right?
he's the man. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
No,
so he's
yeah, he's a good player and he can line up anywhere. That's the thing. He's one of those guys.
yeah. And to your point, Adam, Gesicki had a nice game against the Eagles. So if you're now a week later going up against Ingram, who's every bit as good as of a pass catcher as Gesicki, if not better, then that seems to be the guy. The two guys I feel like who can hurt the Eagles are Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram. I like Tank Bisbee. The Eagles have been better against the run. They've cleaned up their tackling issues. They cleaned up their gap issues for the most part. So I would have a harder time thinking that things are going to fall south in run defense and Bigsby's going to have like a 180-yard game, more so than I'd be worried about, well, can Brian Thomas or Evan Ingram, Adam, kind of take this thing over for them and make it a close game and have them hang in there?
Just from the matchup standpoint, yes, Ingram is a big receiver to me. He's a tight end technically, but he's really a big receiver who's super athletic, and he's had a lot of big games the last couple of years. So why he got the big contract. And then you throw in Brian Thomas. Now again, we don't know for sure that he's playing, but if he gets cleared after pregame, he certainly can do it. Yeah, but that would be one way for them to hang in there. Yes, on your point, that would be definitely one way. If they could protect, that's the other thing.
I think you'll
They've
find
got
that early.
Because remember, Greg, real quick, the Bengals were hanging in there for the better part of 3 quarters,
Without
thanks
question.
to Gesicki and Jamar Chase and a little bit of Eric All. So that's the only point I'm bringing up.
Yeah, I think you'll find out early the worldview of the Jaguars, and if that'll be a function of how they see their defense as well. Because the Eagles are going to score in this game, okay? They may score a lot, but they're going to score. So are the Jaguars going to try to take the approach that, hey, let's try to run the ball, shorten the game, blah, 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 that old school thinking? Or are they going to believe, hey, we need to put up 30, so we need to come out and be, relatively aggressive? They have been a really bad third down team this year. They're near the bottom of the league converting on third down. And when that's the case, then it's really hard to decide how you want to play on first down.
Sure.
Because the last thing you want to do is, run the ball and you get 1 yard and then it's 2nd and 9. And then the playbook keeps starting to shrink and shrink and shrink. So again, I don't have the answer to that question, but I'll be real curious to see how Doug Peterson decides he wants to play on offense.
100%. All right, fellas, it's time to make our judgments about this game. And Greg, I'm going
You
to
probably
start
know
with
how
you.
I feel about this game. I think the Eagles are going to win this game. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I'm going to pick the Eagles to win 38-23. And I think it's a Jalen Hurts game. I think they're going to look at this game as they're very beatable in the pass game. And yeah, Barkley's still going to get, almost like last week. And, Barkley at some point in the game had like 13 for 40 and ended up 22 for 108. Barkley could easily have a couple of long runs and have big yards. No question. That could happen. And it probably will happen. But I see this more as a game where they're going to look at these matchups and the secondary and feel like we can really throw the ball. So I think this is a Jalen Hurts game.
All right, good stuff. Adam, how do you see this game going? I should mention the Eagles are 7.5-point favorites in this game.
Yeah, look, weather's going to be perfect. No question about it. Everything looks good. It's favorable for passing for both teams in terms of conditions. You like that. Unlike the 1-2 years ago when Lawrence turned it over 5 times. So, yeah, a lot of points scored. I'd agree. It should be a throw fest. Eagles will run the game to win it or to put it away like they seem to do when they get a big lead. I like the Eagles here 35-17.
All right, big blowout by the Eagles. And your player of the game?
It's a good question. I'm going to go A.J. Brown. They're going to go over the top, and I know Campbell's
that's a good one
back.
too. Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah,
yeah. They go over the top.
yeah.
We're waiting for. Not AJ's had a very good season, but I'm looking for a huge game out of AJ Brown here.
Oh, you know what? Great minds think alike, my friend. AJ Brown is my player of the game prediction as well, for the same reasons. Outside the numbers, over the top, over the middle. They're going to find him early. They're going to find him often, and the Eagles will win 34-21. So that is a nice little 3-game sweep here for all of us and a blowout, which means, of course, the Eagles are doomed. Because it can't just go that smoothly.
Bad things would have to happen in this game, like turnovers, blocked punts, or I'd be really surprised if they didn't score a lot of points in this game. I really would.
Someone once famously said, "Bad things happen in Philadelphia." I can't remember who that was said. That out. Hopefully not for the Eagles today against the Jacksonville Jags. That's going to do it for Inside the Birds pregame show. Make sure you tune in for Inside the Birds postgame live shortly after the conclusion of the game. For Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks for watching and enjoy your football watching.